thank you to all of you for taking the time to share the information that you did. So we have several questions that have been submitted online, and for those of you who would like to write them down, put the card in the air, and I'll have Gabrielle come around and collect the card. So just wave them here so she knows who wants to turn one in. So, okay, so we're going to start with our question and answer time. We're going to take about 30 minutes to do question and answer, and then we'll kind of formally end the program, but we can continue in a more informal manner just to allow the conversation to continue, but I don't want you to feel like you're being rude if you need to go and so forth. So, one of the themes that we have in a number of the questions that were submitted is things like, I have, a 5-year-old grandchild who's going through transition, and the parents are affirming, or I have an 8-year-old cousin, this kind of thing, this family member kind of issue. And so if you could respond, David, if you could help to answer how they might respond and how to support them, that truth and love, compassion that you were talking about. And then Renee, I'm going to turn to you and your experience as well to answer that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I work with younger boys, usually 12 and under, I don't really work with the boys, I work with the parents, because as I've pretty much indicated before, that there's trauma at the bottom of all these kinds of issues. And so, okay, what do I do about it? Well, yeah, truth and compassion ends up being the same kind of thing. Here's something, I'll get really practical right from the beginning, something that might be a very good home intervention to help the child navigate these issues. And we have books written about this specifically, so you don't have to just listen to me. I can recommend books about these specific practical things to do. If it's true that there's something inherently emotionally off or going on within the child's mind, or the relationship issues between mom and dad and the child, that are something's off, okay? The key is to focus on the relationship. Kids have a natural, automatic desire and mechanism to become. And so they will copy naturally that parent who they feel most identified with and what makes most natural sense for them. And so what we'll suggest in cases is that a very loving, very affectionate, and I do mean physical affectionate relationship, which is probably not there so much before, needs to take place. A very authentic, eye-to-eye, body-to-body contact where that child feels safe. Children who go through these issues really don't feel safe. And sometimes you can't detect it at first because they all end up pretty much being good little boys and girls, and they want to satisfy their parents, and so they'll do anything to lower their anxiety. Well, if that authentic relationship really is transformed so that the emotional, even navigating conflicts, if that relationship stays intact and is specifically worked on through various emotional experiences, not just talking but doing things, that child needs to know what it feels like to navigate conflicts that are internal, and they feel that, wow, my parents are really there for me, their anxiety lowers. You'll see them naturally go more towards the same-sex parent and be more okay, less defensively detached. So creating these kinds of experiences at home that are very close-knit, that inspire emotional connection, that's what needs to happen in terms of, I could go on and on about a lot of details about that, but that's what needs to happen in principle to really affect the emotional issues that are being repressed at the time. I hope that helps.
Very good, David. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Good job in the back. I can't speak to the issue of what I needed as a child, because I do not know what it feels like to be in a family that I feel safe and feel trusted. I grew up without that. So I don't know. I see Shannon's home and her kids and the pictures on the wall, and to me it's an alien experience. But since I've come out trying to help other people suffering from this, I'm in correspondence with a lot of parents whose children are going through this. what I have found works for them through long discussions into the night, first and foremost, most kids really don't want to discuss, they don't want to be intimate with their parents emotionally. And as a result of that, oftentimes the kids, the neighbors' kids down the block know, the dog knows, the cat knows, the sociology teacher knows, and the parent's the last one to figure it out. So what we are finding is the parent, and my gut feeling is the family structure has broken down so much. The parents are working so many hours. There's no communication. There's no intimacy. And worse yet, there is no trust in the family structure. And you have to build that trust up so you have communication that you're not ashamed of, I as a child. So if I could have talked to my mom about this, if my mom had been there, I don't think I'd been here if my parents, were a little bit more together and present. But now I'm finding so many of the female to males, transsexual children, are in homes with single mothers, which is, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this one. So my rule of advice is, first off, at its most basic core, gender is the social role in society. I'll say that again. Gender is the social role of an individual, not male and female, but the social role in the societal structure. And the very first structure the child meets is the family. And if there's something wrong, if the relationships are off, whatever the dynamic is, and Margaret Mahler's research on early childhood development says it starts between 0 and 4 years. By the time you're 2 or 3, it's like you've got these issues. So look at that point. Learn, if your kid comes out, your cousin, your niece, your son comes out, whatever it is, start by reestablishing trust in the relationship, communication, and that intimacy, because the family is where these issues start, the family is where these issues end, and the family is where we then take what we've learned to be, how to be a man, how to be a woman, into the next larger family, which is intimacy with boys and girls, intimacy, and into adulthood. So you have to build the trust, and if the trust isn't there, the kids won't open up. They go to the school counselors, and next thing you know, they're on puberty blockers.
And here's what not to do. One example. All right? 3-year-old boy happily runs around the house for about a month in his mother's red high heels. Don't do anything. Don't slap his rear end or shame him for doing that. No. You want to send a boy into transgender issues or homosexuality? Yeah, shame him. Shame him from the time he's 2 or earlier or later. No. You might have to, after, I don't know, a month or 2, kind of go, hey, you know what? There's this other cool thing Dad's doing over here, and redirect the child. Now, that might be okay, but what you don't want to do is shame a kid just because he's trying to copy mommy one day, because what he's really doing, which you intimated to very beautifully, is what he's really trying to do is to be close to mommy. That's what's really going on when those kinds of things happen. Don't panic, in other words.
And don't send him to a gender doctor.
And that's the other thing not to do. Right. Don't think he wanted to put on pink nail polish. Well, okay, I guess you're really a girl. Okay, let's make an appointment. What? So, anyway.
Thank you.
We have a lot of questions kind of dealing with a lot of different facets of this issue, but the next question I'm just going to keep with that theme, but maybe we can make this quick so we can move on to the other ones. And that is, how do I address an adult who I've known since the age of 5 who wants me to call him by his new female name?
Don't look at me on this. Okay, please, somebody.
I'll take that one just because Shannon and I were talking about that earlier. And Shannon, can you tell your great quote that and then I'll play off.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it was Pope John Paul II that said that there's so many wounded soldiers on the battlefield, and we can't just go into them on the battlefield and start saying, okay, you've been living a sinful life, you start preaching to them about the choices that they've made in their life. No, they're bleeding out. You need to put a tourniquet on, and you need to save their life first. After you get them stabilized, then you can start having those kinds of conversations with them. And I feel like that for me and the people who I have interfaced with, I feel like I want to call them what they're asking me to call them out of respect to them, and hope that it begins a dialogue with them. So
that's exactly what I was going to say. I agree completely. I think that if we refuse to use the name they've chosen for themselves, it shuts down any further conversation. And I think it's okay to use that name, and I think it's okay to address them the way they've asked, because it shows you respect them, you respect their wishes, and it gives you an opportunity to go further in the conversation.
It doesn't mean that by calling them that, there's ways to go about continuing to call them what they're asking to be called, but they can still know that you don't think that this is the right choice. There's ways to do that tactfully. So.
Sorry, real quick. On that note, I just wanted to add a little caveat. So in the schools, there have been some schools are trying to censor our speech, and in that instance, I completely disagree. There is an example. I believe in California, a little 5-year-old had a coming out party in the school, and another student used the wrong gender pronoun, and they were sent home. Nevada, their Department of Education just tried to pass some regulations that would require teachers and students to use the gender pronouns and names of the students. And in that instance, I believe as parents, we need to fight against that, because how do I explain to my 5-year-old that he is a she? I don't want to lie to my children, and I don't believe they need to be sucked into the delusion of someone else. So as adults, I think there's a place to have a respectful conversation and a place to engage in that. But when we're talking about our children and speech being censored in the schools, I think that's a completely different issue, and I would fight against that and encourage you to do so as well.
Very briefly. Ben Shapiro is one of my heroes out on YouTube, and he's always going up against trans activists, and he says, listen, for adults, this is your delusion. He says, I do not have to recognize it or play into your delusion. And where I'm at now is I don't care if you call me Ramon, whatever you need to. But here's the thing, I do not believe you folks should go to jail or be fined for misengendering me, simply because you see through the makeup and the plastic surgery and the breast augmentation, and you say, oh, he. In California, for nursing homes now, it's a crime to call me he. Mm-hmm. And, your natural instincts to call me a man are going to put you in jail if you go past Verdi outside of Reno. So I'm the reason I sort of held back on this is I just think it's wrong that, and Ben Shapiro says it nicely, he says you can call yourself whatever you want to, including Ramon. You have to twirl the R's. And, I don't have to play into that. Children are a different issue. Schools are a different issue. It's a big kettle of wax.
It is. Renee, could you tell us some of the side effects that you've suffered since the surgery?
Certainly. Within a matter of 3 years of taking massive doses of estrogen, Premarin, I developed marbleization of my liver, and my liver function dropped by 30%. I have had chronic stone development in my kidneys and in my saliva glands in my throat. The stones that were produced out of my saliva glands, people do get these occasionally, and they're usually like small, tiny things. I was getting them the size of 50-carat diamonds, and I had to have them removed. My first heart attack was at 40. Let's see, what else? One day my gallbladder simply dissolved, and I quickly, in a matter of moments, developed septicemia. That almost killed me a couple years ago. I'm walking between my house and the yard, and next thing I know, in my left eye, this is 4 or 5 months ago, a curtain came down. The retina detached for no reason. I've had 3 eye surgeries this year. I missed out on a very good paying job back in Vietnam because I had a gas put in my eye, and it'll heal for a couple days. The retina will attach for a couple days and then tear away. And then I go through another surgery, and it attaches for a few days and goes away. One of my friends was, I don't know if I mentioned this, she was overdosed on Premarin. She was given the equivalent of 7 years of Premarin over a 3-month period, and became suicidal when she was taken off of it, and went into a mental institute to keep from killing herself. And you've heard of postpartum depression? That's from a sudden drop in the progesterone level in pregnant women. She was pregnant for 7 years over a 3-month period, and when she went off of it, she lost her mind. Many of my friends have health problems that 70, 80-year-old people should have, and they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s.
And what would be the connection between, for example, the issue with your retina and the hormones, and what about to the breast implants as well? Oh,
the breast implants. Double Ds were a great idea 25 years ago. Okay, any stripper can tell you it was a great idea, when I was working. I have silicons seeping into my body, breast implants are not made for distance. What are they made for? Anyways, so there's lots of associative stuff here, because what the problem is, hormones are the most dangerous drug in the world. Not coke, not opiates like you've got the problem here, not crystal meth, it's hormones. And our bodies, by the time we are born, our bodies are geared towards one set of them. Mentally, how our brains are structured respond to that particular testosterone or estrogen. And now, in order to overcome my maleness, and at first it was my voice because I was a baritone, and I gotta tell you, it took a lot of estrogen to raise this voice up. And as a result of that, a high blood pressure, hypertension. I've been on hypertension pills for 30 years because the body is not designed for this. It's the wrong tool for this job. The job is testicles, is ovaries. Those are the right tools in that right body. Premarin, thank you, Harry Benjamin, it's the wrong tool.
I just want to interject that, we all live in a culture where we're going to Whole Foods and we're buying hormone-free chicken, and yet it's okay to do this. It's a little bit of a contradiction.
It's okay if your 5-year-olds are injected with hormones, but not your chicken breasts.
Yeah, right. And I'm sorry, too, by the way, for the graphicness of this, but we would be remiss if we weren't digging deep and unpacking what's really going on here. So a follow-up question for Renee, just because it just flows easy. Did you feel, after your surgery, satisfied?
No. Here's the thing. You folks, I really don't understand what your lives are like. Every day of my life since I was a kid, I've woke up and gender has been first and foremost on my mind. I don't know what it's like to feel at peace. I'm 62 years old and I've never known this. And I had the surgery, and it's like, okay, I'm finally not going to think about gender. Every day of my life I have to take a pill to simulate being a woman. Every day of my life, I have to, if I've had a cold and I'm just coming over bronchitis, my voice is a little lower than it usually is. Every day of my life, I have to, I'm in corporate, and every day of my life, I have to get my voice up here before I stand and do a presentation. Every day of my life, I have to think, am I passing? I have been in transition every day. You never leave transition. The surgery doesn't put you on the other side of gender, of anatomical sex. Every day of your life, you are reminded in the mirror when I shave. I still have beard growth in spite of $17,000 in electrolysis. You never leave being a transsexual. Ever. You die wondering if you're going to pass at your bloody funeral. And this is why I'm speaking up, because people need to hear this, just like David. People need to understand this, that once you go on this path, you're always on this little groove for the balance of your 40 or 50 years. Christine Jorgensen, I've read all of her work. The transsexuals I know, many of them who commit suicide, just can't do another day of knowing they're a transsexual.
Thank you, Renee. David, could you please speak to the precursors of those who, for those who are struggling with their sexual identity or their gender identity?
Yeah, the precursors, make no mistake, we're not talking about genetics. Sometimes the word is used, predisposition. If you don't watch the use of that term, people kind of end up thinking, well, that means genetic, right? No, it doesn't. Here's more of a precursor or a predisposition. Probably a rather sensitive personality that somebody is born with. If you're born with a more sensitive personality, you probably will be much more subject to trauma events like neglect, emotional distance, defensive detachment, the bullying, the shame that can happen. A precursor looks like unfulfilled emotional needs. I take a client history of every client that comes to see me. I ask them all about their emotional history from the time they were small children, and it's always the same. There's different circumstances, yes. There's different levels, yes, but it's always the same basic principles. Masculinity was something that was off-putting from a very early age. Well, why? Because masculinity, which is becomes something that feels injurious, or who'd want to identify with an example of maleness, whether it's neglect or whether it's overt trauma. Who'd want to identify in the identifying stage around 3 years of age with maleness if it's something that's off-putting or God forbid horrible actually to them? So that's one of the and that develops gender identity inferiority, severe cases of that. And so that's a precursor. Frankly, a precursor really a lot of times is just, well, here's what I tell people all the time. To dads or to whoever the male role models are in the child's lives, if you don't hug your son, another man will. Not giving affection. And some kids, yes, some kids need a lot less affection than maybe other kids. Maybe that sensitive boy needs more of and thank God for his sensitivity, great. But maybe some kids need more affection than others. But if you're having a real relationship with your children, you'll kind of know that. So you got to connect with your kids so that those precursors and then the additional information from the schools that are heading down these paths, so they won't begin to listen to all that. There's nothing that prevents homosexuality and transgenderism more, in my opinion, than a wonderfully connected relationship with parents in the first years of life.
Amen.
Hope that helps a bit.
David, what role do you see pornography playing in the increased rise of this issue?
I would say, so glad you asked that question. I would say almost 100% of the boys and men who are in my office now have been absolutely exposed to porn. Sometimes it's a full-blown addiction, and sometimes it's an intro into male homosexuality. I deal with, I do have some female clients, but mainly I deal with males. So pornography is an immensely growing issue. Think about it. What are we letting our children see on our movie screens? Well, I don't know if you've heard about the new movie coming that premiered last week. It's from Italy, but nonetheless, it's a mainstream acting movie. And it's essentially a celebration of the story of the lovemaking between an adult man and a 17-year-old boy. Maybe you haven't heard. Look it up on the internet. Call Me By My Name is the name of the movie. You don't think pedophilia is the next roadblock people are trying to get through? It is. So, I'm sorry, what was the question again? Yeah, porn. I make sure I was right on track here because sometimes I get off. But porn is devastating our society. I could probably spend 7 days seminar on porn and how to get out of it. The good news is that therapy really works for that. There is psychodynamic therapy and other treatments that really does release the addictive quality of that kind of stuff. But your children, here's your kid. Oh, men, enter. Naked men will come up. What do we expect, folks? What do we expect? And then we have all the LGBT stories. Our children are being inundated with this, and I assure you, porn is making billions of dollars all around the world. So it is an issue. But don't want to leave you with a totally negative note. It absolutely can be resolved. Because I know this because I'm experiencing this with my clients pretty much every week. And their needs for porn, not just a behavioral, oh, don't do it thing, not a behavioral approach. Their emotional stimulations, their emotional triggers are beginning to dissipate when you have a really solid therapeutic background and have a very good compassionate relationship. It really does work. It is hard work. Addictions are hard work, but it works.
I would also say, too, just to add to what David said, that on the internet now you have individuals who are going through, quote, transition, and they're documenting their whole journey, making it seem so normal. And so younger and younger kids are watching this and thinking, oh, they're giving them a how-to plan on how to go about it. They're journeying each journaling, each surgery and process and so forth. And so it's really kind of almost like a form of recruitment in a lot of ways. So it's 8:35. I promised you that we would end at 8:30, but understand that we're going to continue the conversation. So if you need to leave, feel free to do so, but we're going to continue. This question is for Renee.
Oh, Renee. I'm still here.
You said that sex changes are happening without any psychological pushback from the counselors. I thought that counseling was required to get a sex change and an approval from a therapist before surgery.
Very good question. Harry Benjamin was an old school MD, and he really literally wrote the book on sex changes in 1969, the transsexual phenomena. When he did that, he wrote something called the Standards of Care. But because he was really a 1920s German doctor, the Standards of Care don't even mention psychiatry, psychological analysis, until I think the third or fifth item. And as a result of that, he did not really place any weight in the process. It metamorphized through Dr. Stanley Biber into the Standards of Care to doing cross-stress living and hormones for 1 year prior to surgery. And what was the question?
Psychological assessment.
Oh, the psychological assessment. What's happened is when the left wanted to get rid of homosexuality as a mental illness, they went to the DSM-3, and by DSM-4 it was changed because they're basically just a book publisher. Then the American Psychiatric Association, about 12 years ago, they did a vote at a convention without presenting any scientific research saying homosexuality was not a mental illness, but it was a show of hands. And then just a few years ago, the AMA for transsexuality. So what Stephanie's talking about is now you cannot push back. If a kid comes into you into your practice and says, "Well, I think I'm a girl, but I think I'm a boy," you can't challenge them. They want this to be the law, and it's obviously working, because we went from 8 surgeries a month to 10 a day, and we're looking at 20 a day this year, and maybe 30 a day next year in 2018. So the standards of care just don't matter. The original ones from Benjamin really don't care anymore, and that is the atrocity, because I got to tell you, you can see how screwy I am. Most of my friends are on par with me. And this whole idea of gender identity, personal identity, sexuality, loving your mother, hating your mother, it's a ball of wax. And that ball of wax has many components. And what a good therapist does is will eliminate 95% of the 97% of the people who present themselves as transgender, and wash them out so they don't harm themselves. And traditionally, my therapist, who's one of the top in the country, she was only doing 3% out of 100 patients for approving them for surgery. That didn't mean they didn't get it. They'd run off to Thailand. So, the standards of care at this point are a joke. The standards of care have to start at home and start with groups like Cornerstone.
One of the individuals who testified in Concord during the Medicaid public hearing was a psychologist from Amherst who had undergone gender reassignment surgery themselves, and I'm not sure to what degree, but this is the kind of person that's giving the approval for the procedure to happen. So what resources, this might be a question for David, what resources, trainings can you recommend for therapeutic professionals who want to help clients and families with these issues? How do we increase competence?
Good question.
Go to davidpickuplmft.com. davidpickuplmft.com. Next year, you're going to find training programs that are going to be certified, not by the APA, of course, but that are going to be certified in authentic reintegration therapy, formerly known as reparative therapy. They thought eventually reparative sounded too negative, so we went ahead and went with reintegrative therapy. You can also contact me and my colleagues. You can go to my website and email me, or you can call me. It's fine. I'm available Monday morning. And I can next year I'm going to be starting to take on interns that will give them full training from top to bottom on exactly what therapy really is, what is the etiology and the training to get them qualified like I was. I was trained personally for years by the creator of authentic reparative therapy, Dr. Joseph Nicolosi. And so that's what we're continuing his work. So me and my colleagues can train you. It's coming. You'll hear more about it next year. Certainly you can go to resources on my website and begin that process with a resource that's just resources that are on there. But eventually you'll need to have some training, because this is deep stuff. This is not just cognitive behavioral methods only where you go, well, what you're thinking bad about yourself, okay, well, live a great life instead. No, this is very deep work. So I've never had that question before in a situation like this. So thank you for asking that question, because we are talking about real training that would probably take about 3 to 6 months.
I'd like to add to this very briefly, because I know it's been a long night for all of us, that what's happened, what I went through, what most transsexuals go through, is you sit in a therapist's office for a year. Therapist, whether you're Jungian, Freudian, Reichian, it's about talking, okay? At the end of this year of talking, 52 sessions, they say, well, my patient, Renee Jacks, still has these feelings, and therefore therapy has not been able to alleviate the cross-gender identity confusion, and therefore they should. The option is to have the surgery. What they're saying is, that's what they're saying. What they mean is, the tool I'm using to treat this patient doesn't work. There's a difference in perspective. When they say after a year of talking about it, the person hasn't brought the subconscious to the conscious, and they still have this infatuation. That is a failure of the tools that they use. And don't get on the plane. I bring out all of these doctors' backgrounds, and I say it's the tools they're using. And certainly here is a new tool that is working. Another tool, I worked with a hypnotherapist who had dealt with, who was specialized in Tad James timeline therapy with a female-to-male transsexual in LA last year. And by going back into her past with hypnosis, she identified where her discomfort with her female body developed in a timeline of her childhood. And the therapist said, now, in that moment, you're no longer uncomfortable in a female body. You are comfortable. We did 2 sessions with this timeline therapy with this woman, and she stopped having the ideation. She stopped testosterone and is now living as the female she was born as. So the tools traditionally weren't working, but they were saying, no, our tool's working. Psychoanalysis from a Jungian perspective works. It's you that can't be fixed, or it's you that can't be fixed. And it's the tools we were using.
Just a follow-up question with David, because you brought up his name, and I am a big fan of Dr. Joseph Nicolosi. This person asked, what's the status of Dr. Joseph Nicolosi's work, and how can his work be better disseminated? We've got about 4 more questions.
Okay. I'm so glad you asked that question, but in the interest of time, I'll just give you the basics. Those of us who are reintegrative therapists now, next year we're hoping that the work will catch fire, even though the media is definitely against us. But the new part of reparative or reintegrative therapy involves EMDR. Has anybody ever heard of EMDR? Okay, it's the #1 treatment right now in America for healing trauma emotionally for war veterans who come back from wars that are traumatized. Well, remember me saying earlier, sexuality, transgender issues, they're ultimately about trauma, to be simplistic about it. So when we add the EMDR component into a more in-depth than it was before, it worked well before, but now it's like therapy on steroids, is what our clients are pretty much telling us. It's going much more quickly and therefore more profoundly. And so Dr. Nicolosi has since passed away this past year, and so now his son has taken over, and those of us who are his mentees and colleagues, we're kind of taking over the business, so to speak, and we're coming out next year with a new research study, which we think is going to blow people's minds, and also books and training programs to really set the record straight and inform people about what's really going on with these issues. And so, am I forgetting the question exactly?
Just how do we disseminate?
Yeah, so how do we disseminate? If you really want to know how to disseminate, it means you're going to have to take courage. And you're going to have to question therapists and legislators and demand that they are responsible for whatever they tell you. Whatever I've told you tonight, don't believe me just because I've said it. Please don't. Go to the internet. Do your own research.
I'm sorry, David, but I believed Harry Benjamin. I believed Robert Stoller.
Yeah.
And they were wrong.
Yeah. Look at the evidence. You're not a right-wing bigot just because you're asking all of these people, how do you know that? Where is that found exactly? You need to ask me those questions as well. All of us. We're open to that. We don't have time to go into a big research project tonight, but you can contact us, I'm sure, and we'll give you references. So to disseminate that information is going to happen through your schools, through your legislator, and yes, you're actually going to have to talk about it. You're going to have to, if this rings any bells for you, you're actually going to have to take action. And if you need help, would you please call? Email. Call us. We'll help you. We've got all the bullet points. We've got probably all the information you need. Let us know. We'll help you. We'll help you kick yourself out the door and get to work in whatever way that works for you. Maybe in little ways, maybe in huge ways, totally up to you. I would just encourage you to act. Act for your children.
Renee? Did you? It looked like you were.
Oh, no, I was
wanting-
pointing towards you.
Oh, to interject.
I was pointing towards
Okay. So on the point of helping, another question: how do you find a therapist that would support psychotherapy that you talk about, David?
Okay. Here's another website for you. Right now, NARTH, the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, is the only secular psychological association that agrees with all this and is out there promoting research and accuracy and science. I'm a board member of NARTH. Well, if you go to narth.com, that's N as in Nancy, ARTH.com, you can call them and get a referral to check out if there's anywhere in your area or somewhere close to you in the United States of a qualified person who does competent therapy. So there's a resource for you. You can also pretty much do the same thing, since I'm a board member and know all these issues, by just contacting me yet again at davidpickuplmft.com. And
if
you
you
can do
need
that,
the
and I can
oil
set
in
that.
your Buick changed, David.
David
at-
Pickup, lmft.com. If you need tax advice, don't come near me.
Okay, there's another question for you too, David, and I think it's a good one. Do you have any faith at all that the medical community will stop succumbing to the PC pressure and start engaging in legitimate, honest, objective medical science?
My faith right now is in two people: God, who will work his purpose regardless of what we do or think, and people. I don't have any faith very much. If good folks like you, in your corner, even if it's only in your little corner of the world, don't speak up or in some way push forward this agenda, that's where my faith is. Not just in myself, but in folks like you and in all the states that I speak for, especially in Texas. And it's going pretty good in Texas, but still needs more. But that's why, if there is any faith, yes, as long as people act.
All right. This is a question that could be for any of you, and we got just a couple more questions here. What can we do to encourage a healthy view of sexuality, making it less hush-hush in places like church, etc.?
There you go.
Go for it, girl.
You wrote the book.
We'll chime in.
That is not a question for me. Encouraging healthy views of sexuality.
Well, you mentioned church.
All you.
Yeah, church or anywhere.
Church or anywhere? Well, okay, I know you've got stuff saying this, but I'll speak first. I grew up in the repressed church atmosphere. I'm not being antagonistic. My effort is just to be honest. I think churches need to take the families by the hands and have, believe it or not, church programs that are authorized by priests or pastors, whoever, and get down to the facts and teach their members what's going on. Have seminars, have preaching, have lessons that are designed on specifics. It doesn't have to be graphic, but just specifics that treat sexuality as God's gift. That's what you want to teach your children at home as well, that this is God's gift. Sex should be a marvelous thing instead of some shame-based thing or some wild, weird thing. It should be safe, and it should be sane, and it should be something that not just procreates, but something that, let's face it, is pretty great to feel. All right? So if you teach your children that in very holistic ways in either church or home, then you're going to save your children and society loads of heartache and issues, emotional issues years down the road. We've been subjected for at least 100 years to Victorian mentality. Church people especially, in my opinion, tend to have a rather shame-based view of sexuality. Oh my gosh, sex. What? I hear fathers all the time. What? I can't talk to my son who's 12 years old about sex. The typical sitcoms are, the sitcoms are all anti-man, basically. Men are either stupid or horrible, all right, in sitcoms. So what's wrong with fathers being taught by priests or whoever, or people who've been through these issues, about how to talk to your boy about sex, both how wonderful it is and how careful you need to be at the same time. Mm-hmm. It should come from the parents. So that's how to do it, is to educate yourself and all band together with parents and churches alike. Go ahead.
I have a different perspective, and
What?
I have a slightly different perspective. For a moment, I'd like to do an exercise with all of you. I want you to imagine your mothers and fathers in their, if you know them, in their senior years. You know, maybe if they're still alive, that's great. But imagine all of your older mothers or fathers or your grandparents in their senior years. Now, imagine walking into the bedroom when they're doing it. I say this because there is a sense of embarrassment. A natural, they gave you birth, but there's still a sense of embarrassment. And I've known a lot of kids who said, "Oh my God, my 40-year-old parents, I went by and the door was open and I can't see, I'm blinded by this." I think the intimacy issue around your sex drives versus your children's sex drives versus your 85-year-old parents' sex drives, there's a human element to the embarrassment and to want to keep this intimate thing to your own self. And I think this is a very good question. You know, how do we bring it out of the closet? Well, I don't believe thousands of terabytes of databases on IBM servers having porn is the right way to do it. So once again, it comes back to saying, and you see this with kids, you say, "Well, son, I need to talk to you about the birds and the bees." And the kid goes, "Oh, God, So once again, have that trust. And the family is the cornerstone of society. It is the foundation of society, and the integrity of that concrete goes back to trust and communication. So if you want to bring this issue, so your kids can talk to you about homoerotic kinds of stuff, about fantasizing, about tying people up, whatever the range of it is, you're there. And should they feel comfortable talking to their mother about this, hopefully there's a dad or an uncle that they can.
Would you speak to the connection between gender dysphoria and Asperger's autism?
Oh, good question. God, you're testing us. I mean, is this like on the final quiz?
It's like you're in the presidential primary in New Hampshire.
Right.
We ask tough questions.
Let's make America great again. That's what I've got to say.
Where's your hat?
I have to tell you, I have no problem in saying that I don't know. I'm not fully qualified to answer that specific link. Now that I've heard that question come up just in the past month, very interestingly, and so I think we're beginning to hear some of this. But I can't give you an astute or qualified opinion on that because I literally, if you're talking about knowing, I don't know if there is a link. I suspect that there's some correlation, but I can't speak to that.
I've heard of the same correlation in two different research papers while I was in Australia. Here's the thing. The percentage of the population that is suffering from true transsexualism, gender dysphoria, is such a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%, that putting any money into this doesn't make any sense for most medical firms. How many people have ovarian cancer? How many people are struggling with spinal injuries, with prostate cancer? It's around numbers. The more numbers are, the more number of people that are going to be that's where the focus is, the squeaky wheel, the largest number of breast cancer. And even though I've seen this in some studies, the number of people suffering from this, I'm sorry to say, don't qualify for the research bucks. And that's really why I'm here, is to try to say don't do the legislation, because once you do the legislation around gender and around homosexuality, there will be no research, proper research, as to what causes this in the relationship to other diseases and syndromes for another 20 or 30 or a century if you legitimize and normalize these conditions.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question that I don't fully understand, but maybe one of you might. Please clarify the 10-day sex surgeries. Is this in the U.S. only or worldwide? Do you know what that is?
10-day sex surgery?
For male to female transsexuals, After they remove the penis and the testicles, they have to cut through the perineum muscle between the anus and where the urethra comes through. The surgery is extensive. Cutting through that muscle literally requires a lot of healing before you get out of bed. I was in the hospital for 15 days. They're trying to get it down to 10 days to cut down on the cost of the hospitalization. But here's the other thing about these surgeries is once you remove your natural production centers, your ovaries and your testes, that your body goes into a type of shock for anywhere up to 2 years. And it's trying to adapt to the unnatural synthetic hormones. For myself, it was a year before I could work. For my friend who took care of me, who had her sex change later, she was much older, it took her 2 years before she could get up for more than an hour or two. So if you fund sex changes, you're also funding people to be on disability for years. And some of them don't get there. And the other side note to this, are you also going to fund sex changes for those who regret it and want to go, the 5%, 10% that want to go back? You know, $50,000 every pop, $50,000 every pop. And then you're going to be funding $500, $600 in hormones every year. And then all of the associated health issues. You know, are you going to fund a $7,000 tracheal shave? The money, I've done all the numbers for New Hampshire, I would hope that you'd spend the $15, $20 million on sex changes where you can do a lot of good. So, I'm sorry.
Renee, could you speak to the thymus study?
To the
thymus, the hypothalamus?
Oh, I need to stand up. My legs are cramping.
Why don't you come over here because
I'll
we'll
come
use you
over
on
there.
the mic.
Thank you. Thank you all for your patience tonight. I'll wrap this up fairly quickly. A woman doctor I knew in San Jose, California, her name was Robin. I can't remember her last name. She theorized that the hypothalamus, which is like right up here and inside, was responsible for the feminization of males in the fetus, and believed that if she could get her hands on enough hypothalamuses from dead transsexuals, that she could then compare them to that in genetic females, okay? And she asked me, and I said, well, I'd consider, and I was concerned she'd actually do the surgery right there and take my hypothalamus out. So I didn't give her permission, but 3 other individuals did, or 4 individuals. It was a very small sample. And she said, oh, by the way, here's 3 or 4 genetic females, and here are the equivalent number. And lo and behold, the transsexual's hypothalamus looks like genetic females. These people died after years of estrogen treatments. So the problem with so many of these attempts to justify, quantify, answer these questions is that there's no money for it. And the sampling is so small, you cannot, there's been 3,500 this year, there's probably been 20,000 sex changes over the past number of years, people going out of country, going to Denmark, going to, at one point, Casablanca. The number is so small that the number of people in a test survey group is also equally small. And any of you who have done data sampling and data analysis of big data numbers, you know that if you take 100 transsexual patients and you say, well, we're going to do a sampling of 3 patients. Okay, so that's 3 patients, but at that point, those numbers may not apply to the other 97. I've worked with, in my project management life, I've been working with these kinds of extrapolation of valid data from large data sets, you know, hundreds of thousands of millions of samples. and you get off very quickly. You know, you get one person who's an anomaly, and since this is an anomaly of an anomaly, we don't know. So when we talk about Asperger's, we talk about lesbian behavior in male to female transsexuals. It's such a small number of the population. We need more information. We don't need to be legislating until we know what we're doing.
So I am going to ask a final question. Of each one of you, what is the number one thing that you want the people in this room to walk away remembering? I'll let you go first since you're right here.
Oh, okay, thank you. The number one thing, when you see a tall transsexual who's blonde and wearing a pinstripe suit, take them out to chocolate cake. The number one thing is this is an epidemic. It is man's doing. It's doctors' doing. It's society's doing. It's political. It's been weaponized. And the only way we're going to deal with the epidemic is to stop sex changes, puberty blockers for children. We have to stop the source of the epidemic, and then we'll try to deal with the whys. You know, we know how it manifests itself. Now we need to know, moving forward in the 21st century, why we now have people wanting to dress like this.
Stephanie?
So if I'm an attorney, so if I may, can I say something else? And then I actually would like to give you two things. But someone asked a question about pedophilia in the bill, and they were asking if the therapy ban bill would ban pedophilia. And naturally, I'm thinking, ban therapy for those struggling with pedophilic, feelings. So I'm sitting here reading the text of the bill again, and have never gotten that question, nor thought about it, until David said the direction we're going is legalizing pedophilia, or normalizing it. I'm reading the text of the bill, and in fact, if anyone would like to make an argument that someone could not get treatment for pedophilia, that would actually be covered in the bill. How scary is that? The language of the bill says that you cannot work to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings towards an individual of the same gender. So that would include, there's no age restriction there. And I don't think any of us thought of that because normal people don't think that way. And so thank you for bringing that to my attention. I do work with 40 other states, and I believe they'd be very interested to get an email from you tomorrow raising this as an issue, and that our legislators need to also consider that what they've done is, in the language of the bill, is prevented someone from getting therapy for pedophilia. But a caveat is that this bill, as it's written, applies to minors, those under the age of 18. So I'm not sure how that would work legally. David and I would have to talk about it, but thank you for that. So, takeaway, be bold. Don't be afraid to speak up. Speak to your teachers, Board of Education, school boards. Please go to the legislative hearings. Just don't be afraid that you're going to say the wrong thing. Just as a parent, a grandparent, somebody with knowing children or an interest, don't be afraid to just get up in front of a microphone like this and say, hey, representatives, I have concerns about this. I don't agree with this. We need voices. We need backup. We need reinforcements. We need you. And the second thing I'd like to say is Cornerstone does really good work. As you can see, this kind of event isn't cheap. Us talking to the legislators earlier, that took a lot of planning and a lot of people working to bring us together here, flying us all out. And so if you have it in your heart. If you've learned anything today, if you've taken away anything or found this valuable, please think about going to the Cornerstone website and donating and supporting their efforts. If you can't do it now, think about doing it. Yes, think about doing it before the end of the year. We really need all the help we can get, and they really need financial support and your testimony. And just, if you have any questions, call. That's what they're there for. Hey, this school board meeting is coming up and I need talking points. Can you help me out? That's what we do. And so feel free to call, email. We have the resources. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
There's no research that proves being gay or transgender is genetic. There's no conclusive research, I should say. And also, I have to add other things, know that change is possible. It's not mandatory, it's not forced, but it's possible. And I experience it every day in my office with my clients. And so help me get the word out. Help all of us get the word out. Educate, legislate, act.
Great. I just want to thank all of you for coming here tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to educate yourselves, to therefore go out, like Stephanie said, and to educate others. We are recording this evening, and we will be making it available, so check your email for that. Yesterday, we recorded Renee telling her story on video as well, and we'll be making that available. That's a greater length. And so you can be looking out for that as well. And please, if you don't get our emails, please sign up for them on our website, nhcornerstone.org. Also, share it with your friends. Tell them about Cornerstone. And when you forward it, though, take off the unsubscribe button at the bottom so that they don't unsubscribe you. I know there's a couple people in this room that's happened to. So make sure that you take that off. But please, share and to spread the word. Thank you again so much.